Our first panel is putting a spotlight on freight and logistics. But as we will hear, as the logistics sector is highly fragmented, the potential to improve end-to-end logistics is great. Now, it's not all about carbon, but logistics is in the hard to deal with category. So it's definitely worth putting that in context. Transport, as you know, overall is around a quarter of the UK's total carbon emissions, and within that, HGVs and vans contribute more than a third, which is maybe surprisingly significantly more than our contribution to international aviation and shipping. So to discuss some of these really important challenges and solutions this afternoon, I'm really delighted to welcome our next panel. James Stevens, who is Vice President Corporate Affairs for DHL, Steve Griffiths, Managing Director of East Midlands Airport, Darren Briggs, Global Logistics Skills Leader at Arup, and Henry See, Director of New Mobility Technologies at the Connected Places Catapult, our panel. Thank you, gentlemen. I know we're all ready to go, so please take a seat, make yourself comfortable, help yourself to water, or whatever you might need. Thank you. Now, to start off proceedings, what we're going to do is just have a little short opener from each of the members of our panel, just a couple of minutes, so that they can set the scene and just tell us some of their thoughts. So can we start with you, James?
Sure thing, and thank you very much for having me here today. So freight and logistics, what is freight and logistics? Well, it's the system of moving things around, so everything from storage of goods through to the distribution of food, materials for manufacturers, the clothes that you're all wearing, the chairs that you're all sitting on. It's the movement of everything. So we touch, as an industry, every part of the economy. The industry as a whole employs circa 2.6 million people in the UK alone and adds 139 billion of gross value add to the UK's economy. It's also responsible for supporting the UK's export ambitions, whether that be by air, road, rail, or indeed sea. As the world's largest logistics company, DHL, employing about 50,000 people in the UK, give or take, goes up and down, we're at the heart of the industry and we're at the heart of every part of the economy, working for customers in every single sector. So freight as a system. Freight and logistics is more broadly a system with various modes, as we've heard from the introduction, including those road, rail, air, and sea, all working together as one system. When one part of that system fails, or fails to plan appropriately, that system fails, or the resilience in that system is diminished. We therefore need to consider the needs of freight and logistics as an enabler for UK commerce and trade, ensuring that it's resourced appropriately to meet the resilience requirements that meet the UK's needs. The Future of Freight Plan, published by the government last year, sets out the opportunities and challenges facing the sector. These challenges range from a lack of skills. Every industry in the country is facing a skills crunch at the moment. Logistics is particularly hard hit by that, certainly at the lower level ends of the spectrum. We've got land for logistics. We need sites on the major arterial road systems around the ports and airports of the country, and land is becoming increasingly more difficult to get in those locations. And of course we have as we've heard in the introduction, the decarbonisation of what is a really relatively high emitting sector in moving things around. So these challenges the industry can overcome, some of them anyway, on its own, but others it needs support and collaboration from partners and from government. If I pick on one of them, we've touched on decarbonisation already, but as a transport industry, logistics and freight businesses are pretty big emitters of CO2. And recognising that and making huge strides, the industry has been investing great numbers in this. DHL, for example, has committed €7 billion to its decarbonisation efforts over the next 6 years. The transition is exactly that, it's a transition. We're not making a single leap from a business today to a business tomorrow that is zero emission. We have to make regular steps, continued improvements in processes and efficiencies whilst investing in new technology, new fuels, etc., to make that commitment every year. Taking some of the vehicles that we operate into consideration, vans, I'm sure all of you have seen electric vans running around. It's pretty easy to electrify a van fleet. There are only a small percentage of vans that do longer ranges or carry heavier weights that are more challenging to electrify at this point in time. Getting the power to the places that charge them is something different. Short-range HGVs, we've got in our fleet half a dozen shorter-range electric tractor units now running around the country, certainly some of them running around this particular part of the world. I'll leave you to guess who they're working for. Longer-range HGVs, a little bit more difficult. Our reliance at the moment on transitional fuels such as biomethane and HVO is very much part of a plan to move to a lower carbon footprint for those vehicles, whilst the technologies like hydrogen and battery electric improve, mature and come down in cost. Aviation and maritime are much, much harder to decarbonise. I spent early part of this week at the Sustainable Skies Summit in Farnborough, talking to and listening to many, many companies looking at this very problem. And sustainable aviation fuel, whether that be from a bio-feedstock or a synthetic feedstock, seems to be the holy grail, or at least the way of decarbonising aviation in the large term. But the green power required for not just aviation, but the whole industry is immense. It's fairly substantial. The Sustainable Aviation recently published, in fact earlier this week, the net zero carbon roadmap for the industry. In that roadmap, they state that 147 terawatt hours of electricity will be required for the aviation sector alone to decarbonise. So that will be by 2050, obviously. To put that in context, that's about half of what we generated last year as the country. So we've got some significant investments needed in energy generation and energy distribution to enable us to decarbonise the vans, the trucks, the ships and the aircraft that we have in our network, supporting businesses that want to trade and export in the UK. The scale of the challenge is great, but as an industry we're up for that challenge and we're rising to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I now move on to you, Steve?
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So, East Midlands Airport is the largest dedicated freighter-only airport in the UK. Most of the other freight that comes into the UK will come through passenger aircraft and belly hold. So certainly all the operation at East Midlands is very much about dedicated freighter operations. We're very much a facilitator of the end-to-end supply chain and play our part within that. So we have large-scale operations at the airport, both with DHL as a major customer of us, UPS, FedEx, and also Royal Mail. So very significant within the region. You would have also seen over the last week to 10 days, the government announced the East Midlands Freeport, and the airport sits at the heart of that Freeport. And it also is the only inland freeport where you've got rail, road and air connectivity. And I think the USP that East Midlands offer is connectivity, and that global connectivity through the airport. So we, through the networks that DHL, UPS, etc. have, through One Stop, connect to 185 countries around the world through their network, facilitated through East Midlands, and really connecting to some of those powerhouse countries of New York, Singapore, Tokyo, Paris, Dubai, Hong Kong. So enormous international reach from a network perspective. Generally, you'd see at peak months about 120 aircraft movements at night, so most of this freighter activity is at night, so a fairly large-scale operation at night. We move about 440 tonnes of goods a year. Heathrow probably slightly higher than that with the volume of passenger and long-haul aircraft coming through, but significant both in scale. And I guess put that into context, you can see on some of the peak nights about 1 million packages moving through the airport at night. And only last month we saw goods to the value of £1 billion move through the airport in 1 month. So very, very significant from that scale. There's no doubt that through the pandemic, particularly as passenger aircraft operations sort of ceased, it did sort of supercharge the growth that we had at East Midlands, and we have been growing over the last 10 years, but certainly through consumer goods, but also through businesses that wanted to secure up an end-to-end supply chain and also time-critical movement of parts. We saw a substantial change in that. And actually, as we go forward, and obviously we settle into the post-pandemic environment, we expect some of that to actually continue to stick at East Midlands, so we sustain some of that growth as well. But importantly, where we sit in the heart of the region, when you look at the goods that have been transported through East Midlands, a lot of it is advanced manufacturing is the major good. So it is what is happening within the region, followed by aerospace, and really the consumer goods is really only a small portion, about 10% proportion of the goods that are going through the business. So really supporting the heart of the economic drivers within the East Midlands region. I think. And when we look at the value of goods and we compare it across other airports in the UK, it's it's nearly 2 times higher than other UK cargo airports. But when you look at it across all UK airports, it's nearly 168 times. So the value going through. And then the other point is that we sit really in the Midlands, we sit really in the logistics corridor. You just drive up and down the M1 these days, and it is just logistics happening all the way up and down. We've got a dedicated freight rail port, which is also going through expansion. And then also from a road network, we reach the most popular areas within 4 hours, north, east, south, and west. So really, we're there to play our role within the region, particularly providing that time-critical part of the supply chain in the whole logistics of the DHL's and UPS's business.
Terrific. Steve, thank you very much. Now, Darren, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, so as Arup, we provide logistics services to a whole range of different clients, going from the manufacturers, the hospitals, all the way through to working with cities and governments looking at integrated transport solutions. And it's interesting that at different levels in how you look at the logistics sector, you find different issues around how you might integrate systems. So when you look at a city scale, we did some work for London, for example, recently looking at the impact of e-commerce. And just in London, there are 3,000 logistics companies registered. Now, most of these are a person with a van, maybe 2 vans. But the sector overall, when you start looking at that distribution network, is hugely fragmented. And that's fragmented looking at the logistics and the companies and how they distribute. A lot of them lease the warehouses and the likes. There's lots of developers, and that's quite fragmented. Then the infrastructure tends to sit in the private sector as well. They then rely on national highways, Network Rail. So the sector itself, for when you start looking at integrated transport and integrated logistics, is quite fragmented. And when you look at that and you try to develop solutions for supply chains, you end up with another layer of complexity in that supply chains are hugely complex. And most of our clients and most organizations actually don't understand their supply chains past tier 2. And I think McKinsey did a survey about a year ago, and the survey showed that about 2% of organizations had a level of visibility past tier 2 of their suppliers. So here we are as consultants, trying to develop, integrated solutions for our clients. And actually, very often, our clients don't actually understand their supply chains themselves. Now, that creates a number of issues. One, when you want to start looking at decarbonisation, net zero, you want to look at resilience, you actually need to do it as a system level. You need to look at the different options that exist, and you need to make sure that when you look at net zero solutions, you look at the energy requirements of the vehicles themselves, where the goods are coming from, etc. And therefore, you need to have that system perspective. Now, the fragmentation also creates an issue in logistics, and in fact, the data is quite poor. So I'm sure DHL have got some amazing data in terms of how their fleet operates, but the moment you look at a city level, actually the data is really poor. So you'll have some information around maybe HGV movements, but the moment you start looking at vans, for example, and I'm pretty sure I think Amazon at the moment, certainly around the northwest, I think 50% of their deliveries are done by cars, not even vans. But the moment you go down to that level, there's virtually no visibility whatsoever. And therefore, once you start looking at entire systems, it's very difficult to pull the data together that you actually need to make informed decisions and informed policy, etc. Now, there are some good things that are happening at the moment. I think there's lots of collaboration happening in the industry. We spoke about the free ports. We're working on some of the net zero corridors with some of the ports. That's bringing lots of stakeholders together. that are starting to share information, share data, and bring those together. Lots of things around circular economy. I think that there are lots of discussions with a number of our clients around how they introduce circular economies in their supply chains. That's requiring new collaboration, requiring data visibility, etc. So things are slightly changing. But I think there's still a long way to go before, certainly in the logistics sector, and looking at these big systems, we're in a position where we've got the data and everything we need to make the right informed decisions and some of the policies that are needed.
Darren, thank you.
Okay.
And before we come to you, Henry, I just wanted to remind everybody in the room, #interchange for your questions to our terrific panel here. So Henry, your turn.
Hi, I'm Henry Che, working at the Connected Places Catapult, and we are innovations accelerators for improving transport, city and places. And one of the things that we do sit in between the industry, the government and academia of looking at how we can make a step change in the way we work. We already hear quite a lot from the industry viewpoint, but quite a lot of work that we've been working with the Department of Transport and other departments is also recognizing some of these challenges as well. That's where earlier mentioned about the future of freight planned, and something that's so important, I think, is not just industry alone, and government recognize they need to do something. We talk about the sector is so fragmented, unlike DHL own quite a bit of end-to-end journey of the thing, but like the port, there are multiple stakeholders, people own the ship, people operate the ship, people operate the port, people moving the truck in and out, and that, so on and so on. So we tend to keep saying about if there's a delay, is the heavy goods vehicle driver stuck there? It's not that expensive. But you start looking at the whole economy scale of the impact along the end-to-end side, is starting to have a larger scale. So the government's recognizing it and start to lay out the understanding the complexity of it and try to provide a framework on how the land use and the transportation infrastructure should be developed and managed, and hoping to address some of the future needs as well, to set a leadership to the industry to start to develop in that way. There are a few things I've been working with. I mean, I've been privileged with the team, been inputting into part of the Future Freight Plan, understanding the data challenge. Is a lot of people just talk about data, but it's actually what part of data will be useful for both private and public sector. We never delve into that, because if you just go to the private sector, sometimes give me the data. There are some commercial sensitive information as well, but we need to start diving into details as to what data are actually available. In decarbonizations, there are a lot of things that need to be driven by the policy side. So we've been helping to look at like the rail freight estate, and we talk about aviation. It's almost started. We actually just launched a report the other week to talk about hydrogen. How, what's the development of hydrogen going to be? What it's going to be by 2050? You mentioned the figure for electricity. We actually estimated it require, for some large airport, there's only one, require probably 1.8 million ton of hydrogen per day, if the hydrogen by 2050. And we need to start setting this number to allow the energy provider, the infrastructure provider, the airport, airline, start to prepare all these changes. So we are start doing quite a lot of stuff with industry and government, start to laying out this, understanding the problem space, what the step change by different stakeholder, and try to improve that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Henry. And I'm going to mix it up a little bit, panel, in that I want to take one of these questions here. Thank you so much for sending your questions in. So I want to make sure that we do get through all of them. And I'm directing you to the first question on there. How do you view advanced air mobility technology, for example, cargo drones? Is it a threat or is it an opportunity? And how can this technology be integrated into existing operations? Who would like to take that first question?
I mean,
Darren?
we're doing a couple of drone projects at the moment, and I think that the thing with drones is that they, within the logistics world, they have a space. You know, and there's some instances where actually they're the best option. So we're doing one project with the NHS to actually deliver emergency medicine and what have you to rural areas, particularly around Scotland. And actually, drones are amazing to do that. You know, I know DHL are using them in Germany, I think, to connect some of the rural areas. So There's some instances where drones are definitely the solution. Will we see drones driving around cities? I'm less convinced. I know that there's a company in Sydney that delivers coffee by drone. I'm not sure they're going to survive very long, but anyway, it's happening. But the regulatory framework in Sydney is very different to what we have in London, you know. So they are able to do that. I think that kind of operation will not exist in London, I suspect.
And James, did you want to pick up on anything that was said there?
To answer the question, I think it's an opportunity. It's a supplementary technology. It's not going to replace a person on a bike or a person in a van, in my humble opinion. I think there's great opportunities, as Darren said. You know, we do take the case in point we have in the Bavarian Alps. We've got to deliver to some of the villages. It's 6 miles, but it's 45 minutes to do it. So a drone can do it in 3 minutes. So why wouldn't you use drones in that situation? Because you've got the cost of a vehicle and a person doing this mountain pass. We do some stuff in the UK around blood samples and medical tests, much the same as Arup are doing. And if you can do things, Isle of Wight is a great example. So can you take stuff from the Isle of Wight across to Portsmouth? If you've ever done the journey, waiting for a ferry to do that, it can take a long time. So a drone can do that much quicker. So I think they have their place, but they're not going to be in my limited understanding, a revolutionary change in the way that we operate, certainly at the moment.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that?
Yes, I'm involved in both of these programs as well, and something that definitely is an opportunities, and the key thing is about thinking of the application of the use cases, like we said earlier. I'll direct attention, like we actually did a program on our website, actually called the Pathfinder program, actually working between the government and industry, establishing different use cases. It's not one size fits all. It applied in certain area, and some areas are pain. I think some of the things need to consider is the mixed airspace that we need to start to manage and coordinate, and that's the challenge that need to get the regulator, that I know CAA working quite closely on that, and how we manage the airspace appropriately.
Thank you, Henry. Let's go to another question here, panel. Having greater access to data sets about freight movement, would that help us better plan for the needs of the sector? How can we work towards that? Who'd like to take that one on?
I don't
Jump
mind
in.
kicking off. I'll kick off. I mean, you know, I think part of the issue is the fact that, you know, the logistics industry is virtually entirely in the private sector. And a lot of the data around movements and what have you is therefore not easily readily shared, particularly not between competitors. And therefore, you know, we did a scheme in London looking at, in fact, with DHL and TNT, looking at how, you know, the public sector could be an intermediary around actually taking that data and using it for better planning around the logistics requirements for the city. And in my mind, it's going to be around the logistics sector and the public sector collaborating around understanding, one, what is actually the data that's actually needed, because there's a lot of information there, and seeing how it can be shared. Yeah. So, but at the moment, it is pretty poor, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Steve, I want to come to you now, if I may, to ask you about the position of East Midlands Airport as an international gateway for the country and within an international cargo network. What do we mean exactly by logistic corridors, and why do we need them?
Well, I think, so as I touched on earlier, as an international gateway, we are, as an airport, we are part of facilitating activity. Most of that activity does happen at night, because a lot of the goods that are imported and exported, and particularly exported through East Midlands, is express freight. So it's time critical and it's high value. So the key thing for us is actually dovetailing into the network that the DHLs, UPS are operating to provide that connectivity globally. Mm-hmm. And as I touched on the statistic earlier, the study we did last year, you know, brought to bear the realization that actually connecting to 185 cities across the globe is enormous. But all of that is time critical as well. And I think, so there's that element of it. There's also actually being in the heart of the Midlands with all of that advanced manufacturing, with Rolls-Royce and the JCBs on our doorstep, etc. We provide the air modal, but there's also strong rail and road transport links as well. And I think also it's about how you can go to each corner of the UK in a very, very quick period as well. So I think it's sort of recognising the seamless connectivity that we can provide by being integrated into the logistics supply chain, and also making our individual parts of the operation and USP as seamless as possible as well.
Thank you. Did anybody want to respond to what was just said?
I could possibly give a supplement. It's just an example. If you're a business in Newquay and you're making, I don't know, a widget that's going into an aircraft in a factory in Philadelphia, based on our current business plan, we would, and the way that we operate, we would need to collect that consignment by about lunchtime. That would be moved to Exeter. It would be sorted. It would then be trucked to East Midlands Airport. It would then be sorted again. It would go onto an overnight aircraft into Cincinnati. It would then be sorted again, and it would go on to Philadelphia by air, and it would be sorted again, and it would be delivered. And it would be there before 10 o'clock in the morning. And the reason for our business to operate that way is our customers want to send something and have it delivered tomorrow. It's not delivered next week. It's not delivered a week after next. That's a different business or a different part of the industry. That time-critical, time-definite product is, I've got something that has to be there. It could be medicine. It could be, I was at a service centre in Lincolnshire, and I watched some CO2 dry-iced carbon fibre components that were bound for a Formula One team, being shipped out of this little warehouse in Lincolnshire, bound for Steve's airport, and then obviously bound for a European F1 team. So some of this stuff it's all about the value. The value is in the eye of the receiver or the eye of the shipper. Not necessarily, it could be a small widget that costs very little, but if it's keeping a machine or a production line from working, then the value in that consignment is very, very high. So that's the sort of the network and how Steve's operation at East Midlands is really important to us.
Thank you. Henry, did you want to add to that at all? No, okay, thank you. Now, let's go back to some of the questions here. Okay, we've got... Okay, this is a curious one. Boxes don't vote. Do you think the government is giving freight the attention it needs relative to passenger transport? If not, then how can we change it? Thank you for that question. Who'd like to tackle that?
Give it a crack to start with.
Yeah.
No. Very simple answer.
Okay, thanks.
And I think unfortunately, that's democracy for you. I think when we're looking at the economy, logistics is really important for moving people, but also things. And we all will vote in a local election, a regional election, or indeed a national election, and we'll vote for a party that's going to deliver what we want as an individual. We like our food delivered. We like consignments delivered overnight, but we don't necessarily, as public, as society, think about the link between what we want and what things make our lives easier. Quickly pull out your phone, you order something on Amazon or another provider, and it's delivered the next day or the day after if it's not a Prime thing. And it makes our lives really easy. Actually, the things that go behind that are really important, and I think we need to be able to present logistics to government in a better way. My team spend an awful lot of time doing this, but logistics is complex. If you ask anyone, what do you think logistics actually means, you'll get a different answer, if you get an answer at all. So I think for us all in the industry, we've got to be able to speak the same language and explain the role of logistics in the economy and the importance that it plays. So people, voters, will vote for the right decisions, not just for public transport, but for logistics.
Does anybody want to add on to that at all?
Yeah, I was going to say, you'd hope that the pandemic would have enhanced that, because, essentially critical supplies coming into the UK, was what saw us through, the pandemic. And so you'd hope that the importance of freight is clearly, moved up the agenda. But certainly, I think, as James has touched on, industry also needs to take a lead in educating government and sort of pushing them to think differently as well, because not all the answers are going to come back the other way, that's for sure. And I know you probably do that every day of the week, James.
Sadly.
So you'd hope, and I think we are also used to having things at our fingertips now. in the same way that the pandemic forced us more moving towards a cashless society as well, it also resulted in more internet activity, following more in delivery, etc. So you'd hope that would give some momentum to that agenda.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for your questions. We have another here. What role do powered light vehicles play in end-to-end logistics? Who'd like to take that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they play a significant role, and they're part of the entire solution. I think when you look at end-to-end logistics, the trends are the big miles are being done by things that are bigger. We're getting bigger ships, we're getting bigger trains, we're getting bigger planes, all of that is getting bigger. When you look at the last mile and what's happening in cities, everything's getting smaller. We're now doing a lot more on foot, we're now looking at electric bikes, and therefore there's this disaggregation between the long distances and big containers turning up, and then having to do that last mile in cities. So vans are part of the solution, but they're much more orientated towards that last bit. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Now we've got a question about the environmental impact which has come in. Should we be buying local and reducing next day delivery and global shipping of consumer goods panel? Henry?
That's something we actually discussed beforehand, and yes, I think we've been talking about freight and movement of goods, but something is the whole end-to-end logistic, including the supply chain, and we need to make our whole system more resilient. By like recently we saw on the news about like supermarkets, you can't get the vegetable because they're all single source from somewhere. It's more resilience to think about, even like local down the road. I know a few people doesn't like me saying that, but sometimes that is whether it's more sensible to buy something from down the road, but of the globalization, you're dominated by some of the large supply chain. They will buy something in mass in other part of the country, and sometimes it's cheaper. So that's something we need to rethink how we actually look at the whole commercial model. To fit into the different stakeholder. I mean, earlier we talked about the fragmentation is actually people in transport is easy to fix than the freight bit because it's so many different stakeholders that need to be keep happy.
If I can add, I think it's a really good question. I think yes is the short answer. However, we're never going to be able to make everything in the UK, grow everything in the UK that we need. So we're always going to need that international element. But if you can buy something from a local farm shop rather than buying it from half around the world, I think that's a sensible thing to be doing. But go back to my earlier example of that small widget that you desperately need for your tractor to plough your fields, and it's not made in this country, so you need to bring it in. So there'll always be an element of international shipping.
Yeah.
Thank you. We also have a question on skills, which we have talked about in previous sessions. What specific action is necessary to address the skills shortage that exists in the sector panel? Please jump in.
I think I was at a conference about 10 years ago, and we had exactly the same question. And I think the average age, that was 10 years ago, the average age of HGV drivers, I think, was around 55. And everybody was saying, well, in 10 years' time, we're going to have a huge issue with HGV drivers. I think the average age of HGV drivers is still 55. So, it's probably not changed very much. But there is a shortage. I think the interesting thing is also the skills are changing. So either it's because of a lack of workforce or because it's the volumes and what have you. More and more organisations are automating. So you're finding that warehouses, whereas before you needed lots of pickers, you actually now need people who understand the automated systems, the mechanical handling, the IT systems, etc., and the skills are different. So there's a huge need in the logistics sector to actually retrain and upskill a lot of the people that we've got. Yeah.
I think it goes back to that perception point again. How do we convince people that logistics is an interesting place to go to for a career? Why should they be voting for logistics companies to have, or voting for politicians or policies that would support logistics? Well, we've got to explain what logistics is. There's a campaign at the moment being run by one of the big trade bodies called Generation Logistics, and it's about trying to highlight the skills and the careers that young people can have. back in the 60s, 70s, it was cool to be a truck driver. It's not seen as being cool anymore. And as Darren said, the age profile has altered a little bit, but it's still pretty much white, middle-aged, circa mid-50s, and male. So how do you get more people of different backgrounds into careers like that, or forklift driving, or dare I say it, pilots? You know.
And how do you do that?
Well, you've got to try and present the positivity and you know, and the opportunities that a career in logistics can play, and it's difficult. It's not just about the pay scales or the company that you're going to work for. One of the biggest issues with truck drivers is sometimes it's the rest stops. It's I'm going to be on the road overnight, and I don't really like those motorway service stations. And unfortunately, that is what we've let our system become. So we've got to try and not gloss over that, but address the issues head on, tackle them, and promote the skills and the careers in logistics to the next generation.
Absolutely. Does anybody want to have a final thought on that? Because we are, unfortunately, I'm looking at all the questions that we had, and I apologise that we couldn't get to all of them, but thank you for your interest. Anybody want to add a final
I think
thought?
sometimes it's the scale, at the time scale we are planning for scale, and sometimes we are talking about the scale shortage now, and addressing it now is actually probably not what we need in 5 years, 10 years time. And it's quite a bit of work that I've been working with university, is looking at what skill we require in the future. And it's very hard to predict. If you talk to industry, they talk about 5 years. So the university start to plan out the courses. By the time they roll out the course and the people starting, it's out of date. And some of that truck driver may be a problem now. 10 years later, we may have all the autonomous trucks on the road. We will need a very different set of skill, like people who can monitor artificial intelligence as a skill, rather than people who need to do the work as a skill. So it's something that work really hard, and I think industry and academic need to think outside of the current timescale to actually address the next generation problem than the immediate problem now.
Thank you, Henry. That's a good thought to end on. And I'd like to thank the rest of our panel as well this afternoon, who've given us some tremendous insights to a very complex industry. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Thank you very much.